I love Scrum. However, there are instances where Scrum just doesn't work and doesn't make sense. So what do we do? So in this video, I am going to introduce Kanban as an alternative. Before we begin, if this is your first time here, welcome to my channel. My name is Richard. I am the Evolving Agilist, formerly known as Master Asian Corp. If you have not subscribed to my channel, I would encourage you to go ahead and subscribe. And also click on the bell notification so that way when I put out a new video, you get notified of it. So let's go. So we'll start with what is Kanban. So let's take a quick look of what Kanban is and its history. The keywords that I want you guys to focus on is that Kanban came from the lean manufacturing side of the world. It is used to manage and improve work by balancing demands and capacity. It is inspired by the Toyota production system. And in 2004, there's a gentleman by the name of David Anderson that started experimenting with Kanban in Microsoft. He also published a book in 2010, and sometimes this book is referred to as the Blue Book of Kanban. So when do you apply Kanban? So these are the instances when I would apply them. So number one is basically when you have unplanned work, work that you cannot plan. So a lot of those has to do with, people calling in, for example, so supports, IT operations where you get requests to do something. So things that you just basically can't plan ahead. Another instance I would implement Kanban is using it as an easy transition, to Agile and then to Scrum. Scrum has predefined roles and there are sets of things that you would want to do in Scrum. It's fairly prescriptive. So in Kanban, it is not as prescriptive. Because of that nature, sometimes I use it as a stepping stone to introduce teams to Agile and then maybe move them to Scrum. The third instance where I apply Kanban is actually to Scrum teams. So this is not taking Scrum away from the teams or removing anything like that, but actually using some of the concepts in Kanban and applying with Scrum teams. So what this does is actually, in my mind, based on my experience, is actually enhance the capabilities of Scrum teams. So Kanban in general, there are basically 4 principles and 6 practices. So the 4 principles are: start with what you do now, agree to pursue evolutionary change, initially respect current processes, roles, responsibilities, and job titles, encourage acts of leadership at every level in the organization, from individual contributor to senior management. So those are the 4 principles. The 6 core practices are visualizing work, limit work in progress, manage flow, make policies explicit, implement feedback loops, and improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. So how do you start Kanban? How do you start using it and where do you start from? So my guidance comes from the 4 principles. 2 of the principles actually tells you how to start and where to start. 1, start with what you do today. And then 2, respect the roles that you initially have. So this is where it doesn't shock the system, right? Start with where you are at with the roles that you currently have. And the other 2 principles basically give you the information on how to evolve over time and get better at it. You need to agree to pursue changes, evolutionary changes, okay? And then you need to have the act of courage of leadership to make those changes. And this act of courage has to be in all levels of your leadership. Now, with those 4 principles in mind, I like to take the approach of looking at the 6 practices and using that as my step-by-step to adopting Kanban for teams. So number 1, visualize work. Why do we want to do this? Well, real simple. If you visualize work, you can see what's coming. You can see the risk. You can see where your bottleneck is. You can see who's doing what. And you can see also observing the flow. Now, when we say visualize work, most often than not, we think of a Kanban board. That's the most basic. Everybody have a Kanban board. Even your Scrum team have a Kanban board. It may be a Scrum board, but it's actually a Kanban board. So how do you create this visualization? For each of the work, identify the steps that you do. So those are to me stages. For example, you have stuff that are, in queue, and then you get them ready, and then you're in progress, right? And then you may be doing some testing, or you go towards done, right? And then you ship it. So whatever that steps to be, those becomes your, I would say, columns in your Kanban board. Now, do you have to have a Kanban board? The answer is not really. If you can visualize the work, the key is visualizing it. For example, Starbucks is a great example of a store that uses a Kanban practice. When you walk in, do you see a Kanban board? No. What you do see is people working, right? There are practices they do. For example, the coffee cups, as they move from stages to stages, from the time the order was taken to the time that the barista work on it, there are steps in there that visually I can see if there are at any stage where there are too many coffee cups, right? So think about that. How do you visualize your work? It doesn't have to be a Kanban board that is in a system like Jira or a board somewhere, right? It doesn't have to be that, but you need to be able to visualize your work. And this often is, you can have it on a whiteboard, for example, which is I like using whiteboard and sticky notes. If not, then use a virtual one or use the work management tools that you're using at your workplace. Now, for me, I don't like to use those because oftentimes I find them kind of limiting, but that's just me. So the second step here is limit WIP. WIP is work in progress. So limiting work in progress. So why is this important? So why is limiting WIP important? So number one, it allows us to manage our flow by addressing and looking at where workflows happen, right? It also allows us to create a systems of pulling instead of pushing, okay? It reduces the feeling of being overwhelmed with work. Imagine you get too many stuff coming to you, you get overwhelmed, right? And then you panic. And what do? We context switch, right? So one thing is that we don't want to do that. So limiting WIP allows individuals to focus on one thing at a time or a team to focus. So that's why we want to limit WIP. So how do you limit WIP? Real simple, right? So for me, I start with basically looking at the number of people that I have to do the work. So for each of the state, how many people can actually effectively work on it? So start with that. And then from there, using tools or charts like CFDs, and then observing and feedback from your bottlenecks and things like that, adjust it as you go. Adjust each of it. So when you are limiting WIP, there are a couple things that I want you to watch out for. So number one, watch out for hidden WIP. What I mean by hidden WIP, if your work is too big, right? Your work chunk big is too big, you might have stuff in there that's actually hidden. So you want to get your size of work to the right size so that things are not hidden. The other part of hidden WIP is that people might not be telling you what they're working on. The other thing is, don't forget also for on the individual side. Individually, we have a WIP as well. There's just so much I can do. So ideally, as an individual, right, I can only do one at a time. That's the best thing where we're focusing. Remember, we're driving a car, for example, right? You're driving a car, you don't want to be context switching and then, looking at the phone and things like that, which is really dangerous. Same thing here, right? Same thing applies here. We want to make sure that we're controlling that focus. So number 3 is manage flow. So why do we want to manage flow? So you manage flow because we want to ensure that we deliver work. We want to focus on delivery. We want to focus on our customer. What do our customer want to get from us, right? At the end of the day, that's what they're looking for, delivery of your work. So we want to make sure that we focus on that. Now, when we say manage flow, it is not localized. It is a bigger picture from end to end, from the time that order is received to the time that order is shipped or order received by our customer or clients, right? So it's end to end. We want to look at that from the entire system. So how do we do that? So we manage flow by one, controlling the batch size of work. Like I mentioned before, if you have a large batch size, it takes much longer to get through the system. A good example is if you will go to the grocery store, you have a lot of things to check out. It takes you much longer to do it, right? Large batch of work, okay? What we want is to get to the right size. The second one is focusing on the aging of the work. How long has a piece of work has been in the system? So focusing on that, right? We want to focus work on getting things to done faster. So pay attention to the age of the work that is in your queue or in your progress. As you bring them in, as you're working on it, pay attention to that, right? If it takes longer, I want to focus on that first and making sure we close it out first. Number 3 in managing workflow is essentially, if you see an item stuck, what do? Can we get a group of people or multiple people working on it so we can expedite the work? Do we need help? So swarming is a concept in here that we can use to apply. So number 4 in managed flow is important for you to ensure that your team members have what we call cross-skilling. Similar skills, right, or of a certain level that can help somebody else move the piece of work. The other way to manage flow is to ensure that you're pulling work and not pushing work in. So we want to finish, not start, right? So what we do, if you have a visual board, if you have a Kanban board, we look on what's on the right to see what can we do to move stuff to done. And then look from it and start looking from the right first and then go towards your left, right? Pull, we're gonna pull, okay? The last thing is that we want to reduce handoff. So in your flow of work in the different states, how many handoff do you have? Ideally, the least amount of handoff will give you the best optimum flow. So the 4th steps to adopting Kanban is then looking at to make sure that you're making your policies explicit. So what do I mean by making policy explicit? Simply that we need to identify what are the steps or what are the processes that you are going to do. When we move an item from ready to in progress, what are the things that we have to do? What is the requirements? How to do it? Specifying it. When work needs to get done, before it gets to done, what does that mean? So if you are from the Scrum world, you might see this, wait a minute, this sounds really familiar to definition of done, your acceptance criteria. And you are right, those things can be applied here as well. So making that explicit. So why do we want to make it explicit? Simply is that providing a common understanding of work, so everything has a high quality, a common understanding of how to do work. So those are 2 things of when we say making policies explicit. So what not to do when you're making a policy explicit? Well, 1, too much policies, right? Keep it simple and no hidden assumptions. So this is where the danger zone is when we assume something. So ideally, that's why we say explicit, right? Don't assume, make it known. So the 5th steps to adopting Kanban is basically implementing feedback loops. So why we do that? It should be self-explanatory, really simple, right, guys? We take feedback from the systems, feedback from data, so that we can adjust, right? Everything that we do, right? We're trying to deliver. If there's a risk coming in, we need that feedback. So where does that data come from? Your daily stand-up, for example. You may do a retrospective. There are data points charts, right? Your CFD, cumulative flow diagram in Kanban, right? That's the thing that you look at. Also, your data we talk about in terms of, looking and focusing on, pay attention to aging of the work. An example is, say, if you know that on average, work tends to take 5 days to complete, and you have something that just pops up that needs to be done by a certain day. So based on that, you kind of be able to use the data that you have to now that I have this data, I know where to insert my work in. One thing that oftentimes we forget is that a visual board is a form of a feedback loop as well. Because if you imagine it, when I look at the board, right, I can see what's on the board and I can react to it. So that's a form of a data or feedback coming back to you. So to me, visualizing the board is really important. So what are the good practices for implementing feedback loop? Well, I think simply not to ignore it, right? If you can't put it on a cadence, so for example, your daily stand-up might be a cadence, whatever you want to call it. I call it daily stand-up because I came from the Scrum world, right? Retrospective. It's not called on upon in Kanban that you have to do retrospective, but it's a good way of getting feedback for us to inspect and adapt, right? So implement it on your cadence. So the last steps to adopting Kanban is basically we want to improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. So what do we mean by that? Real simple, right? When we try to improve a system, we got to have an idea what we're trying to change. Why? Okay? Evolve experimentally. In other words, what's it we're trying to change? Based on this experiment, what am I expecting to get from it? What's my outcome? When we talk about collaboration, right? Improve collaboratively, right? It means that we want to come together as a team to figure out how to do it. So, 6 hits is better than 1 hit, right? 6 brains is better than 1 brains, right? So that's what we want. We don't want to be in silo, okay? So those are the things. So that will be the last step, step number 6. So here we go again. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there you have it. Hopefully this will be helpful to you. This is how I do it. You guys may have it differently. You may do something different. If you do, let me know. If there are anything that I have said that is, that kind of creates some thinking in your mind in terms of, well, Richard, you said it wrong. It should be this. Tell me so. Okay. So that's it for now. Have fun. Be agile. Bye.